Hey friends, so I have been testing something behind the scenes that has been working so well that I had to hop on here and share it with you. In fact, I was planning on releasing an entirely different episode today. I was going to release one all about my strategy called the podcast first funnel, but I decided to push that one back and share this one with you because it has been so much fun. It's working so great. And I can't wait for you to get your hands on it and start doing the same thing. So it's really one of those strategies that's simple, repeatable, and genuinely so much fun. So here's the deal. Over the last month and a half, that's it. I have been on a mission to get myself on more podcasts as a guest, but not just any podcast. I'm super specific, as I hope you are too, about getting on ones where the host has an audience that mirrors my ideal customer, my ideal listener, which are women who are building a thriving online business and who have a podcast and want to integrate it more into the marketing of their business and turn listeners into subscribers and buyers. And I'm happy to say that in such a short amount of time, it's been working well. So in just a few weeks, I've gotten to be a guest on The Growth Game with Bree Groves, Crush the Rush with Holly Haynes, Get a Heck Yes with Carissa Wu, Duo on Air Marketing with Abby of Duo Collective, and a few more that are also coming soon. So how did I do it? How did I manage to get all of these recorded and scheduled within about 6 weeks? Two things. First, I reached out and I started building real relationships with these hosts, having genuine connections about business and life and all the things. And then here's where the real magic happens. This is what we're going to talk about today. I pitched them on something called a podcast swap. Okay, so let's talk about what a podcast swap actually is. So a podcast swap is not typically what you think, where you go on their show for maybe 45 minutes to an hour and they come on your show for 45 minutes or an hour. This is actually instead where you schedule about 45 minutes where you sit down together and you record one single conversation, a conversation that's laid back, collaborative, and honestly more like two friends just chatting than a formal interview. Then you each record your own intro and outro for that core content so that the episode feels personal for your audience, right? And here's the cool part. You both publish that core content on your own podcast feeds. And boom, you've each got a new episode without doing double the work, without scheduling two separate interviews, without trying to be the host and the guest and the host and the guest twice. It's one conversation, two podcasts, two audience, and twice the reach. As you can tell, I'm very excited about this, right? So why does this work so well? Well, first, it saves us both time. You're not booking two separate interviews across different days or even just like back to back, let's set 2 hours aside. You both get what you need out of a single recording. Second, I truly feel it builds a real relationship with the other host. You're not just guesting on their show and walking away. You're collaborating on something that really benefits you both. And that feels so good and fun. And speaking of fun, third, it's so much fun. I feel like it takes the pressure off to perform as like the perfect host and the perfect guest. You just show up, you share what you know, you tee the other person up to share their knowledge and vice versa. And you have this great conversation that serves your audience. And finally, it gets your voice in front of a brand new audience, one that's already warmed up because the host you're collaborating with has built trust with their listeners. And honestly, it's such a win-win on every level. And I truly feel that's why I'm getting these big name podcasters and entrepreneurs to say yes to doing this. Okay. So how do we actually make this happen? Let me walk you through how I prep for a podcast swap. So number one, before we can even get to the point where we are booking our podcast swap, you have to go in and you have to start cultivating the relationship with the person that you're hoping to do this podcast swap with. And you can do this in whatever way works best for you. Personally, for me, I have been spending time on Instagram. I've been getting into their DMs, having conversations about random stuff. Maybe I see that they post a story about their kids and I comment on that. And then we start a conversation from there. Maybe I comment about something about their business or something that I admire about them, or it can vary, right? But really it's me just reaching out, genuinely interested in who they are as a person, as an entrepreneur, and just cultivating a relationship from there. Then when we have that relationship, when I've spent a little bit of time cultivating that relationship, I say, hey, what do you think about this idea? It's been working so well. We get on to record one podcast for about 45 minutes. We each release it on our show. And I'm going to dive into like more about what you can say in that message. But I cultivate the relationship. I, pitch the podcast swap. When they say yes, we figure out a time. Same thing that you would do if you had a guest. We set aside 1 hour, and that gives us time to record, maybe chat a little bit before and after and not feel rushed. Again, this is 1 hour versus like 2 hours, 2 separate recordings. Number 2, we both bring our favorite beverage, right? The whole idea here is to make it feel very casual. So maybe coffee, matcha, whatever it is, make it super casual. In fact, a lot of times in the podcast swaps, I'll say it's like we're just sitting down and we're just having coffee. We each have our coffee. We each have our spindrift or whatever it is. We're going to keep things casual. And that really just sets the tone that this is a friendly, easygoing chat. And I honestly think that that feels really good for the audience as well as for both of us on the call. Number 3, before we even get to the interview, we craft a few questions in advance, right? So usually 4 or 5 thoughtful ones that really highlight the other person's expertise. And we send them to each other before the recording just so that we can have kind of a loose plan and still leave room for organic conversation. So Abby from Dual Collective, actually, this was cool. She posted on her Instagram stories the day before we sat down to chat. And she said, hey guys, I'm sitting down with the woman who ran Amy Porterfield's podcast for 5 years. What questions do you have? And then she brought some of those questions to the conversation. So that was really fun. I love that idea. I'll probably be doing that soon too. Number 4, we start the recording by introducing ourselves to our audiences, right? Because it's going to be in front of 2 different audiences. So we want to make sure that we can kind of give each other the time and space to introduce one another. And it would probably feel awkward to be like, let me introduce you and vice versa. So you can just, do something like, hey friends, welcome to the show. So today's episode is really special because we're actually sitting down and having a podcast swap. And we're just going to basically both share our knowledge and our heart. And basically like we're having just a coffee conversation, like 2 entrepreneurs who are meeting at a coffee shop and are going to sit down and just kind of spill the tea on what we know. And then number 5, from there, we just let the conversation flow. We each ask each other questions, share stories, and just make sure that we both are, being highlighted as the expert throughout. So that's really, really important. It's not about dominating the conversation. It's about showing up together and creating something valuable for both of our audiences. This is key. And so you really do need to almost tee one another up to speak to your expertise. For instance, when Abby and I, that's the most recent one I did just earlier this week, when we sat down and had the conversation, she would say, okay, I am dying to know, what is your favorite podcast growth hack for somebody who has a podcast? And then I would share it and I'd be like, speaking of, I mentioned SEO. What are your thoughts on XYZ for SEO? Could you share, this or that? And so it's kind of a back and forth banter, kind of queuing one another up to share their knowledge, wisdom, and all that. And it flows so well. Okay. So now let me answer a few common questions that I imagine you're probably wondering about this podcast swap. So question 1, do both podcasts need to release it on the same day? So this is my personal thought. I honestly don't think that they should. I actually prefer that we don't. And I haven't been with any of my guests. The reason being is I think you get more visibility when you spread out your release dates, maybe like a week or 2 apart. That way you each get to do your own promotional moment and it might feel fresh and new if you both release it, right? And then question 2, do we record separate intros? Yes, absolutely. Record your own short intro and outro so your audience understands that this is a podcast swap, right? So we want to treat this podcast swap just as you would if you brought somebody on to be the main guest and you the podcast interview, right? So your audience is going to want to hear your voice at the beginning like they always do. And then you can introduce your guest further, or you can just obviously, as I always say, make sure you have like a hook and then, a little bit about what they can expect to learn, some of the really juicy points, all of that stuff in the intro. And then you can move into the core audio, which you both release on your show. Okay, question 3. How do you pitch the idea? So I mentioned this briefly earlier, but let me dive a little bit deeper into it. So I like to keep things super casual. No surprise there, right? Most of my swaps start with a conversation in Instagram DMs. I'll comment on their content. I'll respond to their story. I'll start a genuine chat with them. And then once we've connected a little bit, I'll say something. I'll probably honestly send like a voice message and say, okay, I've been doing this really fun thing where I record a podcast swap with other hosts in my space that we both actually release on our show. And it's a great way to cross promote and really just be efficient with our time. And it's super fun and casual. We could talk about XYZ. I give them some ideas about, we could talk about SEO, and again, I'm going back to Abby. We could talk about, SEO and like, if it's still relevant with AI. And I know you personally have a podcast, so I'd love to hear how you use your podcast within your business and stuff like that. And I really do focus on how I can highlight them as the expert, right? Because then usually they come back and be like, oh my gosh, yes, I love this idea. I have so many podcasters in my audience. I've been meaning to have this kind of like conversation on my show, and then we book it. That's it. Simple, low pressure, very collaborative. We don't need to like craft this fancy email or this fancy Loom video or anything. It's so simple, so easy. I keep it really laid back. So here is the thing. This strategy has really, really changed the way that I'm approaching podcast visibility. So instead of trying to land dozens of one-off guest spots, I'm focusing on quality collaborations that benefit everyone involved. Truly, each new swap has led to a friendship, fresh content, and I feel like a stronger network for myself in this space. It's had a ripple effect as well. My podcast metrics and traffic have gone up. My list is growing. I'm getting new leads on Instagram that are coming in simply because they heard me on someone else's show and they loved that casual conversation, but also all of the nuggets that the guest and I were able to provide. So if you've been looking for a visibility strategy that's super laid back, it doesn't require hours of pitching, tons of extra work, I want you to give this a try. My goal for you, my homework, is to start by scheduling one swap. Try it out. I think you'll be surprised at how much easier it feels and how much more fun it is when you treat a podcast like a collaboration instead of this really heavy, like structured, formal thing that we have to do. And then if you want to pair this strategy with some of my favorite growth tools, from templates to promo system, repurposing, workflows, all that, I want you to head to podcastmarketinghub.com/toolkit. That is where you will find my amazing, amazing toolkit that includes some of my proven marketing strategies to get your podcast to start growing and bring more leads from your podcast to your email list. So again, that's podcastmarketinghub.com/toolkit. You can grab that. That is it for today. Go pitch a swap, start a conversation, record something amazing. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear how it goes. So I will see you next week. Thank you so much for being here. Again, if you want to grab a toolkit that's going to help you leverage all of this, go to podcastmarketinghub.com/toolkit and you can grab that.